Right, so I'm going to take a slightly different tack, but it picks up quite a lot on what people have said already and focus on cows and the climate. As many of you know, livestock have become the villains of climate change, provoking widespread demands for the reduction in livestock production, even its banning, and switches to plant-based or cultured meat or milk diets. But the relationship between cows and the climate is more complex than the media, think tanks, campaign groups, celebrities, and others project. And we argue in the paper that distortions in the policy debate and the way it's framed create a series of forms of injustice. Epistemic injustice around knowledge, procedural injustices around how data is used, and distributive injustice about who wins and who loses. The paper and the bigger report that we'll release later in the year focus on a particular type of modeling used to define climate impacts and in turn frames climate policy and many of the media and campaign positions. This form of assessment, we argue, causes a variety of distortions and so injustices, and those are focused on some of the world's most marginal populations, pastoralists. The type of modeling is life cycle analysis, widely used to assess the impacts of different greenhouse gases on global warming through looking at all the inputs and outputs from production to retail and sometimes consumption. And it's been used in a number of really important studies to assess the impact of livestock on emissions. The figure most repeated is that livestock contribute 14.5% to total anthropogenic emissions, mostly through methane. The figure is repeated again and again to become iconic in campaigns and media commentaries with all sorts of false claims about equivalence between cows and cars. Picking on one particular life cycle analysis published in Science in 2018, The Guardian rang the headline, "Avoiding meat and dairy is the single biggest way to reduce your impact on Earth." But does all this apply to livestock systems? The simple answer is no. Pastoralists occupy the world's rangelands, about more than half the world's land surface, from the Arctic tundra to the savannas of Africa, and they tend a huge number of different animals, from cattle to yaks to camels to goats and reindeer. They supply markets, provide high-density protein and key nutrients to the diets of many, and they occupy areas that otherwise would not be used for agriculture, supporting the livelihoods of millions. Yet pastoralists and other extensive livestock producers are often lumped together with industrial livestock producers working in contained, intensive systems with imported feed, high reliance on infrastructure and transport and so on. And they therefore suffer from the same policy moves to reduce livestock numbers, change diets, enclose or rewild landscapes. So why is this? In our report and in the paper we discuss this a bit, we investigate the social lives of these life cycle analysis models and in particular their politics. And to cut a very long story short, some such models widely used have a number of systematic biases in data and a set of gaps and assumptions that cause major distortions. And we identified 10. Now, I don't have time to go into these, but consistently, they underestimate the value of extensive livestock, such as these yak in Tibet, in China, which more specific studies show actually may have a neutral, even negative carbon balance. So in sum, a focus on particular systems, high input intensive, and a failure to understand others, extensive low input systems, means that simplistic, misleading assessments about products, meat or milk, are generated. And these are published, repeated in the media, taken up by campaign organizations, celebrities, even some scientists, and become central to the mechanics of policy, statements, reporting, and so on. Industrial contained livestock production that has a high carbon footprint and is responsible for major land use changes is often allied with pastoral production, therefore, and other forms of extensive livestock system in the livestock is bad for the planet narrative that we hear again and again. Epistemic injustices through the promotion of particular models and so particular data, procedural injustices through the use of such data in global assessments and reporting, and distributive injustices, pastoralists lose out effectively, are generated in the process. And in the paper, we look at the European setting in particular, and we argue that simplistic forms of climate change advocacy by environmentalists, food campaigners, and others will miss the target if models are misused and data is misused. And this will undermine people's livelihood and pastoralist environments, essentially the recognition argument that Tor made earlier on. And this is why a justice focus is essential. This argues for a much more differentiated perspective that accepts that pastoral production systems can make use of harsh rangeland environments productively, that these can enhance environmental values, including through carbon sequestration, and they can provide high quality protein and other nutrients in diets, particularly of poorer and marginalized people.